Today's interview is with Richard Lawrence. We talked about going into IT by accident, about helping humans do more meaningful work together, and being in the moment. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello everyone. And with me I have Richard Lawrence. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you.
And here that actually means, oops, it goes a little bit slow here. With me, that means in Ghent, in Belgium, and we're going back to the United States and to Denver, all across the world and all the other side. So this is where you're not that far from Tricia, if I'm correct.
That's right.
So that's, oops, and where is my mouse? Seems to have disappeared a little bit. So let's bring you back on screen here. And with me on my side, it's a little bit before 10 in the evening. And what's the time on your side?
It's a little bit before 2 in the afternoon here in Denver.
So with that, we see that there is a lot of time differences, of course. So that's also one of the advantages of the internet, of being able to record. But I jumped right into that. So Richard, say a little more. What do you want people to know about you?
Sure. I'm Richard Lawrence. I'm co-founder of a company called Humanizing Work, where our purpose is to make work more fit for humans and help humans be more capable of doing meaningful work together. My journey with this agile stuff started a little over 20 years ago. I was a software developer, and my team was struggling with the traditional kind of waterfall style approach. And so I went looking for something else. I was young and didn't really know like there was the right way to do it and it had to be that way. So I just figured there's got to be a better way to do this. And I found this delightful little book that had just come out in 1999 called Extreme Programming Explained. And I brought that back, and my team, the first version of XP Explained, which I haven't been able to find since then. I ended up buying a copy of the second edition, and because I lost my original copy of the first edition 23 years ago. And that just transformed the way my team worked. Our work got more sustainable. Our software was better quality. Our relationship with our customer was transformed. And so that stuck. And even though this was the end of the dot-com boom and that company died, that way of working stuck with me. And then over the years, more and more of my time was explaining to other teams why my team looked different and showing them how they might be able to adopt some of these things, until that became my full-time job around 2007, 2008. And now my work is helping other people be successful with this stuff, and way beyond software now. Only about half our clients are in software anymore.
Wow, that's already a big change. Yeah, and I brought up the fact the first and the second edition. I love both versions. For me, they're two different books, but I love both versions.
They really are.
Because that first version is no longer able to find it. It's actually one of the few books I will never lend to other people. It doesn't leave my own home office because of the exact same reason. The second edition, no problem. I can lend it to anyone. But the first edition, this one stays with me because indeed, I still regularly look at it because I feel that, I've learned so much about it, just like you and many others. So thanks for sharing that. And okay, let's jump right into that first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you
are? I got into software pretty much entirely by accident.
Wow.
And which a lot of people don't realize. I was on my way to a PhD in government. Studying mostly medieval political philosophy at the time. And I had a young family and needed to pay the bills. And I'd grown up with a software developer dad, and it was just a thing I did on the side, and decided, this is probably better than going and working at Starbucks or something. So I started working part-time, and then it became full-time while I was doing full-time university and grad school. And
Wow.
once I
So,
was
a
almost done with a master's, yeah, it was a lot, with two young kids. And
wow.
then I decided, this thing I'm doing on the side to pay the way to the thing I thought I wanted is actually the thing I want to do. I don't want to be in academia for the rest of my life. So I dropped out all but thesis on my master's and never really
Wow.
looked
So,
back.
so you were nearly at the finish line. Let's put it like that, and you dropped out at that moment. Is that how I?
I was nearly at the next starting line because there's the master's, then there's the PhD. So it was more like, do I really want to do another 5 years of this before then kind of starting a career? Or, yeah, this is pretty successful right now. I like the work I'm doing. It seems to be having an impact. Why don't I pursue this? So that was the end of formal school for me. And so I never studied any of the things that I actually work in, which means I have uh, different fields to draw on, which has been useful and I think has shaped me a lot compared to people who came up the more direct path into something like software.
Well, I think at the time, because I have no idea what age you are, but you don't look that young. If you're not 20 anymore. Let's put it like that. Especially if you
That's right.
started out with extreme programming in 1999. That means probably also that yeah, at that moment there was not that much into IT in school. I mean, I've studied around at the early 90s, and I remember at university that was actually the year after me they would reform the thing I was doing. I was doing mathematics. And it
Mm-hmm.
had an option IT, and the year after that they would change it to full IT. So that was really in the early 90s. So that was still in the beginning of creating whatever they're trying to do. So I can imagine that when you were studying, that it was something similar that maybe it didn't even exist, or that, well, it was just the beginning also at your university.
It certainly had little connection to what the work actually turned out to be. As I talked with friends who were in programs and software development, it really didn't line up with what my day to day looked like as a software developer on the side.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that many people who were training, who were giving lectures in university and schools, they never worked in that industry, so that made
Right.
it really hard. Even today, I already see that the people that are training IT, that they might have studied IT, but they've never done it or not for a very long time. So at that moment, that was probably even longer. So, but yeah, like many at that time, you learned by doing, I would say. And
That's right.
you said I didn't have any, well, you didn't have any degree, but it looks like you studied a lot by reading books like extreme programming and other things like that.
And grew up programming just as a hobby.
Ah,
And
yeah,
so
you,
it
you
was
had a
already
dad who
there.
was programming, and so that
Right.
means that your father was working on the very first computers around, or how should I see that?
He was. He was working on mainframes with punch cards in the U.S. Air Force in the early to mid 70s, and then
Wow.
ended up with a career in mainframes and then in embedded software. And in a delightful turn, just before he retired, I had the opportunity to coach one of his teams as they were
Hmm.
adopting an agile approach. So it was
Wow,
fun for it
that's
to come back around.
that's fun because you learned, well, in a way. Well, he couldn't bring a mainframe, but I assume at some point he brought home a personal computer, and then you did stuff together, or how should I see that?
We had our first PC a few years before I was born,
Wow.
in '75, and you loaded applications off of cassette tapes at the time. And so I grew up programming BASIC from like 6 or 7 years old, and then Pascal and C and Java and
So
all these
you,
things
yeah,
and early websites and all that.
some people they read with their children, some people they do sports with their children, other people do programming. Why not?
Right.
Something like that. And probably for you it felt just normal. That's the thing that dads do with their sons. Probably that's how I
Right.
can imagine it feels for you. Yeah, that's what a lot of people think. Talk to me here, that they say, okay, that's how I thought parenting was, because that's what my father or my parents were doing. And yeah, at that moment we don't see a lot what other children are doing. so with their parents, or
Right.
limited visibility. So
And the
that is
same thing
indeed.
happened with the next generation. Uh,
Mm.
my middle son, who's 20 now, is working for me on a software startup. And he
Mm.
also went to school for something else and then ended up accidentally finding his way into software development.
So and he knew that story from you, and he or not.
He did. And so it's kind of the same thing. Third generation programmer who didn't intend to be a programmer.
And ended up doing it anyway. Okay.
Right.
You warned him so much, but still he tried to escape.
Right. I think what
Yeah.
that leads to is none of us are really enamored with computers or technology as an end, but we
Mm.
see it as this is a tool that's useful for human purposes. And insofar as it's useful and helps people do meaningful things in the world, it's interesting. But none of us are excited about spending time with a computer for the sake of the technology. And I think that's been true across all three generations here. And I hope continues because I think that's the right place for technology to be in service of humans rather than the opposite.
I fully agree, and it's and how is it for your son? Because that means that your son grew up basically always with the internet. So does
Mm-hmm.
that mean that for him it's he yeah, he sees it as a fully tool to use it all the time, or how is that? Uh, because if I look at my children, they have a hard time understanding how a computer could be doing something without the internet. For them, it's like, no, a computer without the internet, it feels useless. Where, of course,
Right.
we know a bit different, but
It's true. And I think we homeschooled our three sons, so
mm,
they're all adults now in university or done with university, and we homeschooled and lived a variety of places, and we're really deliberate about how we approach school. And one of those things was mostly not using computers until they were about 12 or 13, so they
mm,
didn't grow up consuming on the internet. And when we finally did start using computers, it was for doing things like recording music. Uh, so they were creators from the beginning with the technology, a
creators
little
more
bit of
than
programming.
consumers.
Exactly. And so I think that has changed how they think about it as tools to be used for things. So my youngest is an engineering student, and he's on his computer more than either of the other two sons, but it's always 3D modeling so he can print something and build a physical thing. And none of them are really spending time just consuming and thinking of the computer as an access to the internet primarily. It really is a
Mm,
tool to extend their capabilities in the world. And I think part of that was delaying a lot of their interaction with the computer and the internet until they could handle that kind of abstraction. And so they weren't just sitting back and having it fed to them, but they
appreciate.
were able to do things in the real world. And then the computer was an extension of that.
That's interesting, and I think, well, in a way, what I see when with social media, I think sometimes people can be yeah, with TikTok and Instagram, they might be doing a lot of creation at the same time. So I think
Mm-hmm.
for the current generation, the people who are growing up now, that it might be a little bit balanced, but definitely the people in between, there was a lot about consuming mostly, and still at the same time, we know that social media, a lot of people consume much more than they produce. But I see with, well, with my youngest daughter, I see really that yeah, that she was creating a lot also at the same time with friends and stuff like that. So, but also creating in a way that for me feels different. They create stuff with this actually throw away stuff. They don't care if they create a video and it's thrown away. Where for me it feels like, okay, when you create something, I want to keep it, and things like that.
Right. There's something agile about that they're growing up with, where the cost of creation is relatively low, that they can get a lot of iterations. Uh, so my son is learning video production now to support our software business, and he said to me today, I don't really like the video we just made, but by the time I've made my 100th video, I think I'll feel pretty good about it. He just expects there's going to be a lot of reps and a lot of throwaway. And I think when I was his age, I would think of, I'm putting all this effort into this thing, and now it's kind of precious to me.
There
I
has
think
to
that
be the perfect version and whatever. And yeah, I think
right.
agile has, yeah, I think a lot of us we do this a lot more, like smaller iterations, much more. And I think there's a lot of value in learning, just learning for doing. And I think, well, you have a well, you have music instruments behind you, so I think music is a lot about that. You practice a lot more than you play live, at least for the non-professionals. We
Mhm.
do a lot, and we practice, and most of that is not recorded and it's just thrown away in a sense. And then once in a while you record something, or you do a gig, but it's a lot more practicing.
That's
So
right.
yeah,
And
that is a lot more.
my best music experiences are uh, ephemeral. They're being in the moment with a group of people creating something, and it wasn't recorded. I'm not going back and listening to it. It was just an experience of making a thing, and I get to keep the memory, but it wasn't about the artifact.
Yeah, I think that, and there's a lot of, well, agility around that, and I think well, and the way we made software in smaller things, and okay, we iterate and we make a better version. We don't care if it's not perfect. We know that we can just adjust it and make a better version out of that. So that is, yeah. That's really interesting. Okay, let's move to that second question. What is for you your biggest challenge, and why? Oh, I forgot. There's another one before. Sorry. If you hadn't been doing what you've been doing now, what would it become of you? You have any idea?
I probably would have continued that academic route, and I'd be a professor teaching political philosophy or something. So it
So
actually wouldn't
teaching
look
is
that
something that,
different
well, that was what I was
because I'm
about
a
to
teacher
say.
now.
You're a teacher now, so in that sense, the things that you're teaching is different, but in a way you're teaching, and you're teaching. Well, what I would say the difference might be is that you're teaching things that you have done, that you've lived, and that you understand very much. Where in the other way, the thing that you would have been teaching was what people taught you, but that you didn't experience, maybe.
Right.
So
I think
that
that's
that
true.
might be a difference in that. And but did you, if you look back at that, you said you were trying to go there for the university. Is that really what you had in mind in becoming a professor? Is that a dream that you had when you were young, or how should I see that?
That too was indirect. I went to school originally for civil engineering, and then I discovered partway through civil engineering that I wanted to use that engineering towards a more human end. And so I transferred universities and combined the engineering work with uh, a degree that was called intercultural studies, so kind of applied anthropology. So I wanted to figure out how to use engineering and technology for international development. And then went on to
That
grad
seems very
school.
similar to agile in a
It
sense.
does. It does. And that was, I think, the beginning of me understanding the importance of people and technology and process and things in service of people.
So you did
And
understand that before, well, or more or less at the same time that you were programming, but at the beginning of your career already, I would say.
right,
Because
right.
I
And I
think
was
if I
interested
look
in
back at a
building
lot of
physical
agile,
things.
yeah, if I look back at agile, many people discovered the thing that you discovered earlier on, well, a lot later in their career. So you kind of realized that already while you were studying. That's interesting. You know
Right.
where that came from? How did you discover that?
I think my parents brought me up with a deep understanding of the value of people,
Mhm.
and always trying to see people and care about people. And so I grew up in a family and a larger community that really valued people as people. And so when I got into whether it was uh, education, thinking about career, or into the workplace, that seemed to be a thing that I carried with me that I wasn't so much thinking about at the time. And it's just paying attention to the human impact of the choices we were making, the processes we were using. And I realized later that that was somewhat of a differentiator and worth developing. But at the time, originally, that just seemed obvious, as these things do. Whatever you grew up with seems obvious to you.
Yeah, so that's yeah the environment that you're in. That is, but it's interesting. And I interrupted you, but you were saying that with civil engineer you wanted to do it for physical things, so not computer parts, if I'm understanding. It was
Right. I
for
didn't want a
buildings.
job around computers. And I liked the idea of building buildings or designing a property or something. I ended up working as an intern on an orphanage in Guatemala doing site planning and surveying for them, and really enjoyed
Wow.
being outside, working in the physical space, and
So with your hands
help.
actually building. So it's
Right.
not just in theory and in designing and architecture thinking, but
Hmm.
really physically doing that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Wow. And what age were you when you're doing, if I can ask?
So I started university at 17 in
Hmm.
the mid to late 90s, and then I was beginning to work in that space in my early 20s. And it was very brief. Then I went back to grad school thinking, I want to understand this idea of humans and their relationship to their technology and community, and how all these things work together uh, better. So I went to grad school for that.
Wow, it's an interesting trajectory that you moved in all kind of directions, but it's now in retrospect, it all feels very linked. But I can imagine at that time it didn't feel that way.
It didn't. It felt like big shifts from one thing to another, and I could only barely see that thread. And now it feels like a bit of a post hoc explanation of how it all makes sense. But at the time, there was definitely a feeling of throwing away the school credits and the money and changing direction a couple
Hmm.
times. And
Yeah, and somehow we seem to think we have to have one vision and there's one thing, and and the more I look at things these days, it's like no, it's actually the generalists that look around at multiple things that can connect different kind of things. That there is a lot of value that is not always seen in our society. Because when people see you now, they might look at you. Okay, Richard is the one who's doing into agile and all that stuff because you've been doing it for a long time. But actually, you were looking very broad earlier on and multiple things. So that's interesting to bring that on. Okay, if I want to go to that third question that I was almost started before, is that what is your biggest challenge today, and why is that a good thing for you?
my biggest challenge today.
Well, the one that you want to share, of course, because there's
Right.
always things that you might not want to have on the internet.
Exactly. The This feels like a bit of recency bias, but the thing that feels like the biggest challenge right now is uh, understanding this current economic environment and how
Mhm.
to help my company do well in these times, and help our clients find ways to make it through a difficult economic time and find a way
Yeah,
to
just
continue to
for the
thrive and grow.
just for the people, we're recording this in halfway February 2023. So there's have been a lot of layoffs and huge layoffs, I would say, in the industry. I think a lot of the larger companies have been laying off a lot of people, and that's what you're talking about, of course, because I can imagine that a lot of the work that you're doing is for some of these larger corporations and or even the smaller ones that are all looking now what will happen because well, there is a war going on for a year almost now, I think. So we just came out of a 2 year. Well, I don't think the pandemic is really fully over. It sometimes feels over, but I have a friend of mine who's very sick now recently. So yeah, even that, it's not over. The war is going on. There is yeah, a lot of things going on. That so I can imagine that is a challenge. And so how do you feel it inside your own company? Could you say some more if you want to share about it?
Sure. I started the first iteration of humanizing work in August of 2008, a few weeks before the 2008 financial crash. So, and I started really as a developer just before the .com crash. So it's like my career has been start a new thing right before the world falls apart, over and over
Mm.
again. So the thing we're experiencing in our company is our clients and prospective clients feeling nervous and slowing down their investments in training and coaching and even in new products and the kinds of things we help them with. So we see that. We see a lot of individuals in our community of clients and past students and getting laid off and trying to figure out what they're doing with their careers. And so the thing that I was thinking about earlier today is how much is this going to feel like 2008, 2009, where uh, it was a matter of switching how we talked about the benefits of an agile approach from uh, things that made sense in a time that felt abundant to things that make sense when resources feel scarce. But it feels like there's something different about this time
Mm.
from that one. And I don't know if it's where we are in the overall adoption, sort of like Moore's curve, where it still felt like we were in that early stage with Agile in 2008,
Indeed.
2009. People were hearing these things for the first time, and it felt like there was more possibility. Now it feels like there's a lot of people who've had some bad experiences, at least with the words, if not
Yes.
the real thing, uh, which we can talk about later if you'd like. And so I'm trying to figure out now how we talk about this in a way that people can experience the benefits that are possible, because I think the the ideas and practices we have in the agile community really are the thing that will help individuals, teams, and organizations survive and thrive through a time like this. But I haven't yet found what exactly is that message, what is that value proposition, even probably what is the need exactly and clearly. So
Yeah.
it feels like we're starting over and doing customer research and product market fit on existing solutions in a way.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. On the other hand, I do know that Joshua Kiryovsky and the large agile conference in August 2022 or July, I don't know exactly when it was, but was talking also about, well, yes, we've been doing it for 20 years. That feels a long time, but if you look at the whole scale of creating software and the whole scale of the industry, that still is not a long time. And I think it's somewhere in between. We need to figure out, and I really like how you put the link back to 2008 and 2009, because at that time, indeed, agile was kind of the savior for a lot of companies at that time that were having troubles. And they were looking like, okay, how can we deliver more value and focus much more on that value? And I like what you, well, I'm not sure if I like the situation, but I do recognize what you say about the words and how people are looking at, because a lot of, yeah, focus the last years have been about the output of agile and yeah, delivering twice as much in half the time, whatever. But that for me feels really like the wrong message. It's really should be like, okay, how can we deliver much more value, and by not doing the things that are not bringing value? And that seems to be a message that sometimes is forgotten. So that and yeah, I can imagine that the companies that want to invest in this kind of thing, this is the moment. And when you said earlier on, I started a few times. At the moment it was there for me, I I prefer to have, well, I see that people who started the company or things when things are not going good are actually much healthier. I know a person that started his freelance career during the dot-com boost boom, and he was spending so much money on lots of stuff that were totally not needed. By the time it crashed, he really had a problem because he couldn't control his expenses. And so people who started the company back then, right during that crash, learned a lot better to focus, okay, what's now really the value and where do I want to spend money on? So it's a good moment to start these kind of things. But yeah, I feel the same problem that you're feeling, like, okay, let's focus now. How can we help our customers most? And how can we help them focused on that value? So that's but there is that question has for me two parts. So the challenge and why is it the good thing? Do you have already see something that is good for you or your company in this situation, or is it too early?
I don't yet see how it's good for our company. I think I can see from the previous experience of going through two other downturns how this could be good for our industry as a whole.
Mm.
Because I think you can do a lot of silly and wasteful things when there are extra resources around. And I think a lot of the energy over the last few years that has gone into scaling, for example, uh, has been a lot of noise and a lot of waste. And
Mm. So we
those
might get
things,
rid of a lot of waste in that period, in this
right,
period.
those things don't work when you're in this kind of environment. So I think we're going to see a lot of pulling back to what actually works when we need to pull a team together to deliver meaningful value in a short amount of time. And that's going to, I think, come back to a lot of the XP practices that we started with 20 plus years ago. And I think that would be a healthy thing to move away from the big processes and big organization back to the team and small set of teams working together towards a meaningful outcome. So I think we'll see that peel back to the core like that. I think we'll also see, like as you mentioned, companies that start or have a formative period during a hard time tend to be healthier in the end if they make it through that. And so I think we will see some companies that come out of this much better than they otherwise would have. I did a webinar a few weeks back on how the things that make for good product ownership in particular, but good agile practices more broadly, are the things that will be differentiators for a team or an organization during a time like this. I think you can stand out more, especially if you had fewer resources to begin with. The
Mm.
playing field gets leveled a little bit for you.
So yeah, you bring the quality of the work that you deliver of the team, how are independent of how big or small you are, the quality gets higher. So yes, and like you say, we are probably a lot smaller in these things. And I agree that I seem to feel that there is a lot more pressure to go. Well, pressure, I don't know if it's the right word, but a lot more people looking back again at the extreme programming. Yeah, the practices that we seem to have lost a little bit. And for me, doing agile, well, I'm now particularly talking about the software world, of course, but if you're doing agile in the
Mhm.
software world, you need technical excellence. You need a lot of these practices that, yeah, were there in extreme programming. And we seem to have, well, I don't think we forgot it, but there's a lot of people there that don't know that and that have that kind of thing.
Right. I suppose you have a whole generation of people who've learned agile on the job, at least the terms, and have never encountered something like test driven development,
Mm, yeah,
or
indeed.
even the phrase test driven development.
Yeah,
Right. So
or
there's an opportunity to rediscover some of those things. And I wrote a book a few years back on behavior driven development because I found that kind of collaboration around small examples made a big difference for my teams. And I would love to see practices like that making their way more into the mainstream of software development.
for me it seems that a lot of these things are always coming back. I mean, because for me BDD, when you talk about it, or even every a lot of things that are doing in domain driven design and with event storming and whatever, it all seems very similar to what Ken Beck was talking about with the CCC, the fact that you had communication, you had to work with your clients, you had to work a lot of that stuff. It's like, okay, we had that, it seems to work, and then somebody created a tool to make it easier and forget about talking to the people. And then few years later we had someone else who said, well, we need to talk again to the customer, so let's start with behavior driven development. And then somebody created a tool for that to automate it and to avoid that you need to talk to the customer, and now we're back again. So it feels that we're relearning all these situations. And yeah, we need to, and of course we learn things from the past, and we can reiterate on that. But somehow it feels that sometimes we keep, as a, how would I say it, as a community, we seem to forget that it's all about talking to the customer and making sure that we deliver value in the end. That's the thing. I know you from a lot of the things that I've read and use some of your tools. You're a very driven person, so you're passionate about a lot of these things, um, and I feel that same thing here in our conversation as well. Do you know what drives you, where that passion is coming from?
I have a, a strong drive to make work better. I observe that people spend most of their waking hours at work, and most people seem to be miserable at their work, and
Mm.
that feels like a deep human problem that needs to be better. And product development, particularly software development, is a space where, from experience and study, I've learned some things about how to make work not miserable. So I think the thing that drives me is seeing people's lives improve, because they go from uh, I'm disengaged, I hate my work, I'm exhausted when I get home to my family because my work has sucked all the life out of me. See people go from that to work as a place where I can express creativity and create a meaningful impact in the world in collaboration with other people. I've seen that transformation happen so many times. So the thing that drives me is making that happen, and all the little things that I do, whether it's helping with something tactical like story splitting or BDD, or talking about bigger things like why we do what we do. All of
Mm.
that comes back to work should be more meaningful, and people should be able to collaborate to have a meaningful impact in their work every day. And I see ripples out into the rest of people's lives when that transformation happens. It doesn't just change people's experience at work, it changes their entire life around it, because so much of your energy goes into work or gets taken by your work.
Well, and most people spend at least 8 hours at work. So if you're miserable during 8 hours, that
Right.
has a huge impact on you because,
It
well,
does.
it depends on how many hours that people are awake, but 8 hours is a big time. And then depending if commute comes in it, and maybe we spend a little more than the 8 hours, and yeah, so it's, if people are miserable in that time, that has a huge impact. And do you see that just in the IT sector? Because you talked earlier on that you do a lot of the work also outside software. Do you see similar kind of impact? Do you see similar kind of people that are kind of burned out in their work yeah, before you come there, or how should I see that?
I do. I see that everywhere. I don't think it's a software specific thing.
Mm.
We're
Yeah.
fortunate in software in a way that complexity hit software before it hit a lot of other industries, because of the nature of the work of software development is creating new things for humans, often in collaboration with others and often with some kind of communication element to it. So that's inherently complex, and that required software people to have to figure out, before a lot of other industries, how do we collaborate well around complex problems. So I think Steve Denning is right when he says it's sort of a coincidence that it was software people that discovered agile.
Mhm.
uh, and it's in software terms because that was the world that they were in, but they were really discovering things about being human and doing complex work with others. And we're seeing the same pattern in other industries we visit, where people are getting burned out a lot of times because they're trying to treat this complex collaborative work as if it's not, as if it's plannable, as if it's a thing where I can do my part and you can do your part and we can put them together later. And that's just not how the work
Not which
works.
workers work exactly. That's might have worked a little bit in a factory, and even there we see what Toyota was doing with their system, that even their humans, yeah, can actually improve a lot. I think there's a lot there.
That's right.
And yeah, you talked about, well, the luck that we were developing agile and these ideas in the software world. I think beyond budgeting is something that is
Hmm.
completely different, but at the same time, around the same time, that created some kind of similar kind of things, I think. So, yeah, a lot of us were discovering similar kind of things. Okay, talking about discovering, is that what would you consider your biggest achievement? I don't know. Is it easy for you to, because basically this is your moment to brag, and I don't know how easy it is for you to brag. Is that something that is easy for you?
It's not so easy for me. Um, but if I try to answer the question honestly, I don't think my biggest achievement is work related at
Mm-hmm.
all. I think the thing that I'm most proud of is that I have 3 sons who are good adults now and are on their way to making their own impact in the world in meaningful ways. Each of them different in that, and so I
So
think
you're not going to
no.
select one of them to say that's my biggest
No.
achievement.
Now, one of the things I particularly appreciate about them as they've grown into young men is that they are so different, and yet I
Mm,
can see um, me and my wife in them, and I see them carrying forward a lot of the best things about each of us and building on that, and really becoming great men in the world. And so I look forward to seeing that happen. So that's way more meaningful than like 2 million people have downloaded my story splitting poster. Uh, that that feels completely meaningless in comparison. I'm glad it's helpful, but my work is not the most important thing I do.
I recognize that, and yeah, this is of course the default answer. That, well, the default is maybe exaggerated, but a lot of people feel that, yeah, that their family, and of course we're much more in the world to help them building our children and looking. And I like the way you said it, is like, okay, whatever you did, somehow your children are the best of you and your partner, because that's really nice. It could have been the worst of both, of course, but somehow they ended up taking the best parts, which means it somehow you yeah, the way you raise these boys help them to select the good parts, I would say, because that's
Right.
there is
And one of the
still
things
a
about parenting that's striking to me is that the things that bother me the most in them are the worst parts of me.
yeah,
Like, oh,
I can
you got
imagine.
that. And so if I'm self-aware in those moments, I recognize that that's not really a problem with him. That's a problem with me, and I
Mm.
probably need to address that as much as I need to correct and guide him.
Yeah, and the children are a good mirror for us in many ways, and
For good and
typically,
bad.
yeah, and typically at the moments that we don't want it, it's the most obvious thing that we see in that. That's true. But like you say, there is also the good parts in it, so it's that's the
Mhm.
nice thing. And if
In
you,
terms of work, uh, the the moments where I feel like the greatest achievement is every year, except the couple of years when we weren't meeting in person, we gather 100 of our best clients in the mountains in Colorado for a kind of intense in-person conference.
wow,
And there was a moment last September where we'd finally got together for the first time since the beginning of COVID. And looking out over 100 people and seeing the connections they were making and being able to pick out individual people and think about how my colleagues and I had affected them and how they've affected other people, and just thinking about the ripples through that community. That's the point where it feels like okay, I've been part of something meaningful in my work, and it's
mm.
those chances where I get to see the human impact of what I'm doing.
Yeah,
And
and
that conference every year is the moment where that happens.
And like you say, then it's not just the artifacts that you created and whatever, if it's that poster, if it's the software, whatever. No, it's the connections between the people. And if you're able to do something that, because what I understand is that it's a mini conference, or mini, if it's 100 people, it's not even mini. But if it's a conference with people that are from different kind of clients, so these, you
Right.
kind of mix them up. And and yeah, it feels also that if you were talking before about the challenges that we currently have, that's actually might be part of the solution, because that might be a good thing to do with these people that are laid off, and that to say like, okay, how can we help each other and grow that these connections even harder. uh,
Indeed. We run communities of practice for our clients, and I've been seeing as more people have gotten laid off, they're getting more engaged in these communities.
mm,
And it's been fun to see them show up not just as people in need of a new job, but as people who contribute to the community. They just now have a little more time to do it, and they're showing up so generously as people who have good reason to be stressed and feel like they don't have much to give right now. I've seen several people in our community in the middle of that help other people out in big ways, and it's been really encouraging to watch.
that's really nice. It's interesting. So you do communities of practice over companies. So basically, you say anyone who's interested in learning about story splitting, or learning about, I don't know, facilitating a retro. Is that how I should see it, or can you say some more? Because I think it's an interesting
Mhm.
concept that not many people are familiar with.
We do three of them. We have one for scrum masters, coaches, facilitators, one for product owners, product managers, that type, and one for leaders in agile organizations. And if someone has been in one of our workshops, they're eligible for any of these. And then second Friday of the month, we have a Zoom call with the scrum master one, third Friday with the product owners, fourth Friday with the leaders. And we do a mix of teaching something, some of the sessions, and then many of the sessions are here's something we're trying to think through, a challenge someone has, or the edge of some topic we're working on. Let's work it out together. And we pull together people from all over our clients. So we have some common basis of knowledge and language, but then they all have different contexts and they step up and help each other.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it reminds me of the beginning of the agile community in Belgium. Was very similar. That was organized in a way that, and that's okay. There is a certain company that has a problem, and so they foresee the room, they foresee the drinks and the food, and then we meet in the evening, and we as a community, we come with, I don't know, 10, 20, or 40 people, and we just discuss that problem, and we help this particular company. And that's how we grew, and we did that, I think, every month or something like that for a couple of years. And that really helped to create the community, to create and to help each other. And in a way it was free consultancy, but in a way we all learned so much about it, and that was really interesting, and that grew. I still have fond memories of some of these workshops. So it's really a nice way and a nice touch to bring people. And it's not something I've seen recently at that scale, and so it's interesting to think about that. So that definitely inspired me already. I already think about a few things that I want to try again, so thank you for sharing that. And talking about sharing, the next question I want to talk about is that, do you have a personal agility tip to share? Is there anything that you think is interesting for people to know?
When you say personal agility, you mean outside of the kind of work team context?
I on purposely don't define it, because what I've noticed is that people interpret this question in all kind of directions, and I kind of like that.
Mhm.
So that's, I leave it completely up to you how you want to look at that question. That
Okay.
makes it harder, but also more interesting, I think.
I'll take the challenge. Uh, I've seen a lot of people trying to bring agile approaches into other parts of their lives where they've experienced something good in a work context with Scrum or whatever, and they think, well, I want some of this goodness in my home or something like that. And we used an agile approach for homeschool for
Mm.
15, 16 years. And I've written extensively about it on our website over the years. And the one biggest thing I've learned, if I could provide one tip, is that your family is not a scrum team.
Mm. Yeah.
So don't just copy process, but understand why these things work when they work. Like getting together people around a shared goal and self-organizing how you want to achieve it makes a lot of sense. Nominating somebody in the family the scrum master and somebody else the product owner and building a backlog and going through all the events and everything is not the right tool for the job. It's not that kind of team. So if you want to bring these things home, don't just copy the recipes and apply them, but you really have to understand why they work and bring the why home, but not the how.
And I think that's true in any kind of team as well. Is that a lot of
It
times
is.
they ask, "Oh, we want to do agile by the book," and I always point back to this thing behind me that lots of books that contradict each other because they're written just like yeah some of the things that you've written. It's written about a very specific situation and it worked there, but that doesn't mean it will work everywhere. You need to again, like you say, you need to look at the why. Why are we doing things, and then figuring out what works. And in work, in a lot of cases, scrum masters and product owners might make sense, and there might be other places where it totally doesn't make sense, like in a family. I can
Right.
definitely look at that. It's yeah, it's
I
you yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I often joke that the most dangerous personality in the agile community is the scrum master or coach coming off of exactly one success, because they're very tempted to try to duplicate that success somewhere else without really understanding why it works.
Mhm. And yeah, that or even worse, I would say, is that if you learn about the success from someone else and you totally don't understand it, and then you try to copy
Yes.
it, which is a little
Richard
bit,
says you have
yeah,
to do it this way.
oh yeah, and
No, he doesn't.
but I've learned from him. Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that going wrong. But yeah, it brings a lot of well questions about how we teach things because yeah, of course, when we teach things, we teach them also some of the how because sometimes it's important, but it's always important to say, wait a minute, now you understand what we do. Okay, let's look back and why we do it. And I think the same is with raising children is that if there are two or three, you're not going to explain a lot of the how, a lot of the why. We might explain a lot more the how. I'm already happy that they can walk and that they can get dressed, but not let's not. Although they ask a lot of whys at that moment, also, but yeah, it's a completely different kind of tools. Thank you for sharing that because I think it's really important that when we look at things that we consider that why and that we look at okay what are the things that might work and even if in for whatever reason it might work to have a scrum master and a product owner in one family, it doesn't mean it will work in others and all kind of things and so there's a lot to learn there. So thank you. Let's move to that next question about remote work. And you already talked a little bit about that you were working remote, of course, in COVID. And so let's first start with: Did you do a lot of remote work before COVID?
Before COVID, I traveled every week. So I was in person with clients almost every week, doing 110,000 miles a year of flying. Since COVID, I'm almost entirely standing here when I'm working at my desk.
Wow, so that's a lot. Well, basically from never remote to full time remote, almost like that.
Exactly. Yeah, almost overnight in March of 2020, uh, the in person suddenly stopped. And it was 2 years of
Was that a
figuring out
big?
remote.
Was that? Oh, okay. That's kind of answering my question. It took you already 2 years to figure it out because yeah, I can imagine for a lot of people that you had to do that switch overnight, but overnight doesn't mean that you figured it out overnight how that works. So
Right.
there's
Overnight was how do we do something next week to keep our company alive and get our client the thing that they needed instead of that in-person class I was going to go fly and teach. And then over the course of 2 years, it's how do we figure out how to do this as well or better? And one of the surprises has been that certain things are learned better remotely than they were in person.
Mm.
Before COVID, I was a staunch advocate of in-person training as the best way to learn something.
And
And
so,
at
could
this,
you share something? What you think is better working remote to teach?
I, I'm not intending to go back to teaching any of the product ownership content in person. It is solidly better experience over Zoom and Miro, not least because we can see each other's sticky notes and read them. So when I've got multiple breakout groups working hands-on on an activity, when we were in person, that was tiny handwritten sticky notes all over the room, and we didn't have the ability to share and talk about it very easily.
Hmm.
And now when I've got all that happening on a Miro board, we can have the small conversation that feels pretty similar to how it felt in person, except they can read each other's writing too. And now we get back together and we can reflect on what was going on in these different groups and what it means. And so when the content is like information centric and it's about things like backlogs, it seems to work way better remotely with shared visuals than it did in person. When the content is more about kind of personal transformation, like some of our leadership training that we do, I think that skews slightly towards better in person because it's easier to be vulnerable and connect with other people in person than it is over a video conference.
Mm.
And so we're still doing some of those things, or starting to do some of those things again in person, like a executive team kickoff we did a couple weeks ago was way better in person than it would have been across 4 offices with busy multitasking executives.
I think that's that you mentioned there's something very important, the multitasking part, because of course, if you get there is the advantage of doing it remote that you can say, okay, we can do 1 hour here and 1 hour there, and that is good for busy executives. But at the same time, you just know that they're going to, yeah, that it's harder for them to even stay attentive for 1 hour. And if you can get them to some kind of offsite where you basically, well, almost can confiscate their phones and their laptops and say, okay, now you have to focus here, that actually might work much better. And I think that there's a lot about that focus, don't you think? Or is that something else that you see?
I think that's important, and I think people can just connect in person in a different way. If you and I were talking in the same room, uh, it would it would be qualitatively different in
Hmm.
some ways. We would be able to connect in a different way, and I think that's just because humans are embodied creatures, and we've been working in this disembodied way and get some of the benefit. I mean, it's certainly a wonderful thing that you can be in Belgium and I can be in Colorado and we can talk to each other at the same time. And that wasn't true 20 years ago. And I appreciate it. But it's not the same thing as sitting down at a conference over a beer and having a human face to face conversation. So there's some things that are just easier to do that way, I think, just because of what we are as physical creatures. But I think there's also a responsibility for me as a trainer to make multitasking feel like a bad idea.
Hmm.
Uh, because this thing that's happening is so interesting that I don't want to be doing something else. So as I do course design, uh, I can't fully take responsibility for people and their distractions, but I try to take quite a bit of responsibility for. I need to make this engaging enough that uh, multitasking won't feel like the right thing to do at any moment.
But you need to have that connection first, and that's a little bit what you say, yeah. Because if you're remote and for whatever reason I'm still distracted and I don't have focus for the first 15 minutes or whatever, I might not even pay attention at the moment that you're saying the thing that should attract me to do it even more.
Right.
And that's the kind of hard thing. And if you're in the room, of course, that's, yeah, that's a lot harder
It's a
to
little easier to
yeah.
make it
And
happen in the room.
and you can actually say, okay, you actually see people a lot more when they're losing
Mhm.
focus. And if you see that many people are losing focus, then you also know that, okay, maybe it's time to take a little break and stuff like that, which is again a lot harder if you're remote and you don't always see that kind of thing. It's
Right.
but yeah, I agree. It's that connection. It feels different at the same time. If I compare it, because in what was it, in 2005, I did my very first remote team, and it felt that it was possible from people that from Belgium to Yekaterinburg in Russia, and it was a lot of it was possible. But if you compare the Skype that we had at that time, like, yeah, if I would see screenshots or whatever, it probably remind me of old computer games that are very pixelmatic, and we thought we saw each other, but we didn't see each other like we're seeing each other now, not at that same level. So I think a lot of that is already a lot better, of course. Um,
For sure.
that's so yeah. If you compare the tools at that time, so of course, then we said let's peace be in person every time. So yeah. So if you talk back to a tip, what is something about remote working that you said, okay, so some of the things I would never go back. So the training of the yeah, if you're sharing knowledge, so that's what I'm hearing, and the personal connections more physically, and so that's for training. Do you see something similar
Hmm.
for development? How would you do that?
I think the thing that I've learned there, so if I think about the product development work that we do in our company, we've discovered that we have to be more deliberate about when we're collaborating and when we're coordinating. And
Hmm.
collaborating, actually doing work together, coordinating, like planning the work together, but doing work separately. And when we're planning our week on my team now, that can include things like new online course development or podcast production or marketing. Like, there are some things that we actually build as sort of products. When we're doing our planning, we think through what's going to require us actually doing work together, what's going to require us checking in as we work, what are some things where you can just say you're taking this part and I'm taking this part. And when we were in person, it was easier not to have to do that because you
Mhm.
could just speak up when you needed someone. And if you're in a team room, you just get instant collaboration for free at the cost of some loss of focus. But I really loved working in a team room because we didn't have to anticipate when we would need to collaborate. And now that we're remote, it's where in person it was easy to treat everything as collaboration. Now, remote, it's easier to treat everything accidentally as coordination,
Hmm.
and in the process have missed opportunities to work together. So we're explicit now about what are the things that really benefit from collaboration, and let's uh, make time to do those together. And usually, let's pull that forward because that's usually where the complexity is. So something's going to
Hmm.
come out in that will shape the rest of the work. So let's do that early in the week or early in a project.
I really like that you say, okay, not just the difference between collaboration and okay, let's the communication and everything around that, but really like, okay, let's also bring the collaboration forward, because that is where you will discover lots of stuff.
Mm.
And the remote work, well, I see indeed a lot of people saying, okay, remote work, it brings us a lot of focus, because like you said, if you're in a team room, you're disturbed all the time, and if you're a person that goes very quickly back to a focus, that's fine. But if a lot of people have trouble and with that, and so that had some advantages for people who are really into the collaboration. But yeah, now we need to look back at the other part. Okay, we had that focus time, but we need to look at deliberately about when will we collaborate. And then that collaboration, what I'm hearing, is still a lot remote, so that's not always in person. Or did I
That's right.
misunderstand?
Our collaboration is entirely over Zoom, Miro, Notion, various tools that help us share information. We get together on my team a few times a year.
And then when you get together, it's really more about the bounding part, the
Exactly. It's more about
connecting.
the human connection.
And so
And
that
we
there's no, well, almost no work probably, or more. Yeah.
Or the work that we take on is for the purpose of having done something together, but not
Mhm.
as much for the uh, more efficient output or something.
So it's a team building by doing something, not just whatever team building exercise, but really collaborative
That's right.
working together. Because that's
Yeah,
that's probably one of the best ways to do team building, is to deliver, well, to create something together.
right. And to eat together. I think those are the things humans
Mm.
have been doing for millennia in building connection is put up a barn together and have a big meal together are just deeply human activities.
Yeah.
We have a shared purpose and then we've connected around food. So we build that into whenever we get together with people.
And is that so? What I'm hearing is that that's a deliberate plan. So you well, you had COVID now, the period for about 3 years. So that's, you said, how many times a year do you plan this? Do you have already kind of fixed way, or are you still discovering this? How should I see that?
We're still discovering this. We started this particular configuration of the Humanizing Work Company in late 2020. So we've never had normal. We had 2 years of COVID and now this time of economic disruption and figuring out what things look like now. So there hasn't been a steady state there. At the previous company, I co-owned Agile for All. We got into a rhythm of doing quarterly meetings with the whole team together for this kind of work and strategize and eat. And that felt like a good rhythm. So we'll probably end up something like that, but remains to be seen.
Well, like you said, well, there might be the new normal, might be something like we're doing now. It's like it doesn't feel normal, but in a couple of years we might look back and say, okay, maybe that was the normal at that moment, whatever that
Right.
situation is. Yeah, it's yeah, it's situation like it is. Okay, let's move to that next question. What's a book that you have read that you wanna share about? And from what I understand, you had a few books that you wanted to talk about.
Um, I tried to make a list a while back of um, the books that had most influenced me
Mhm.
and what I'd learned from each of them. And I gave up around 50. So I'm a big reader, and there's a lot of books that have influenced me. Uh, so I've thought of uh, a couple that have been significant influences on how I think and how I teach. One that's probably less familiar to the Agile community, and one that may be a reminder to some people. The one that was very formative for me that probably almost nobody in the Agile community has read is a book from the 70s by E.F. Schumacher called Small is Beautiful.
I think that's multiple
That's the
covers
one.
of that book because
Yeah, and the
it's
one I
already
have
an
has
old book.
the cover of mine looks even different from those three. So there's a lot of them out there. But that subtitle, Economics as If People Mattered, caught
Mhm.
my attention back in university. I think I discovered this in probably 97 when I was thinking about that technology and international development intersection. And I was just skimming back through Small is Beautiful today, and it's probably not a book I would wholesale recommend to most of my clients. So it's not on my standard reading list or anything.
Mhm.
But uh, there were there's one core idea in there really, which was thinking about how scale changes things. That different parts of human life function well at different scales. And as you
Mm.
go too big or too small, the character of the thing changes. Like a city, for example, uh, it is possible for a collection of people to be too small to make an interesting city. And there's some size after which the city doesn't get better by adding more people. And likewise, a team or a club or any kind of human thing.
Probably your
And so
family
think,
has something similar as well. I mean,
I think so. Yeah. Uh, yeah. And I'm not going to expand on that too much. Yeah. So there's an optimal human size for different things,
Mhm.
and not just gatherings of people, but also our infrastructure, our processes, the tools that we build. And so this was the book that got me thinking about the relationship between humans and their environment, and being deliberate about some of those things. The vigor's not necessarily just more of the same thing and somehow better, and economies of scale often aren't.
Mm. Yeah, I think I think we see in these days and age, as I think we see a lot of that. That yeah, companies were trying to scale at the level that we're now seeing. Like, okay, how healthy is that, both for the companies as for the rest of us? I think there's a lot there
Right.
that we see, and but on the opposite as well. I mean, when you say the minimum size of a city, I remember reading, I don't know, couple of years ago about a very small city somewhere, and I think it was in the UK, where there's like 4 or 5 people. Yeah, at some point it becomes a problem of not becoming a real, yeah, because then you're both the mayor and
Right.
the priest and whatever. I don't know how to yeah, there's a minimum that number of
And
people that you
there's,
need.
yeah, that city won't have interesting concerts and restaurants, and uh, there's not enough people to have the fire department and the bank, or yeah, there's
Exactly.
some minimum collection of people there. And we see this on teams where
Mhm.
something different is possible with 7 people than is possible with 3. But turning that 7 into 20 isn't, 3 times better.
Mm, right. So that's yeah, and I think we can say the same thing about conferences. You talked about that conference that you're doing with just about 100 people. If I compare, for example, the conference in Europe, for me it feels like we're scaled out. Like there's a lot of small conferences. If I compare that to the large agile conference in the US, that's like a huge conference, and I personally prefer the lot smaller ones in Europe,
Me too.
where yeah, there's a lot more, and sometimes it's the same session, sometimes it's different people, but yeah, it's just like it feels a lot more like about connection and learning from each other. And so yeah, there's
It's a different
definitely,
kind of thing.
it's exactly,
A
that's what the
2,000
word
person
that,
conference uses the same word as the 50 person conference, but
but
they're
it's a
really
different
different
beast.
things that we're calling by the same name,
and,
and
and
good for different purposes.
Exactly, and it's the same thing for concerts. If I go to a conference, a concert, sorry, in a bar with just 20 or 50 people, that's totally different as the what was it yesterday, the Super Bowl event, where yeah, with millions of people looking. That's a totally different beast. So
Right.
that's a different kind of thing. And yes, there's live music, and but it's yeah, it's different. The different kind of feel, and they both, we can like both of them for different kind of reasons, but it's
That's
not the
right.
same thing. It's not the same thing, and I think it's really good to think about that size really does matter in different kind of things. Not always that big is better, and but there's the advantage, and I think it's good for us to think about what's the ideal size, both for the company as for whatever that we're trying to do. I think that's really is important to think about. And I think, well, I hope at least that we're going back to an environment where we don't always push for bigger, and because at some points things are not always better. Okay, you wanted to talk also about another book that you said that this might be a little bit a revival for some people, or people rethinking about it. Let's put it that way.
Right. The work of Eli Goldratt has shaped my thinking quite a bit. The goal is
This
the
is
the first
multiple
of a
editions
whole
of
series of books. Right. I have the one on the left, so but they're pretty similar. The
it's
goal is a business novel about a factory, and uh, it has this core idea that every system has one constraint, and you really only need to work on the constraint to improve the result in the system. You don't have to change everything at once, which is hugely freeing.
Yeah, it's
We don't.
once you start to understand it, it's like, wait a minute, okay, because typically we always look over, okay, we want to improve. No, there's actually, let's first look and discover the constraint, and only then start working on it, and then you notice that all the rest, it doesn't matter. And yeah, you can apply it to so many different things. If you look at larger companies, if you look at their system and whatever is a problem, you see them investing a lot of money in whatever thing without looking at, okay, but what is really is blocking my delivery for whatever point of view. Let's first look at that constraint, and only then, when we discover that, let's see what we need to do that at multiple levels.
That same
And
idea works at every scale. When I'm making dinner, I'm thinking about what part of this is going to limit when I'm going to be able to eat dinner. And I
mm,
think about what thing I start first, and like maybe I'm going to get water boiling in the background for my pasta while I'm preparing vegetables. Because if I do them all in sequence, the whole meal takes longer. But I know waiting for the water to boil is going to be the constraint on eating.
I can
So,
do something else while the water is on the on yeah
right.
is trying to boil. Yeah, I
There's a
like
new
that.
constraint behind it.
Yes, but it's interesting because I didn't think about that. But when I was when I was at university, I was doing my laundry. I very quickly discovered, okay, I first need to put in the white clothes because they stay that long, and while that's in it, I can sort the colored clothes, and then because I was doing my laundry at I don't know, at a laundry service or whatever, so I could use five, six, whatever machines that I wanted. But I discovered after a couple of weeks or months the ideal speed, or the ideal thing, because that's like first the whitewash, because that takes the longest time, then this color and that, and yeah, and it discovered that the second longest was not the best to put in first, because it actually, after that, it needs to dry, so it's actually better to then, after the longest, to put the shortest in first, so then I could start doing the tumble dyeing or whatever. And it was a
Right.
real discovery. It took me quite a lot of iterations. I never thought about that from the point of view of the goal, but when you were just explaining, it was like, wait a minute, I was even doing it back then without
Right.
understanding that it's but that's the fun part of it,
That's
is that.
really Goldratt's third book that we're talking about here, Critical Chain.
Mhm.
So the fun thing about reading the whole series of Goldratt's books that he wrote over 25 or 30 years, starting with the goal, is with the goal, it sounds like he thinks he's describing how to improve manufacturing lines,
Mm,
because that's what he's talking about. And then with the next book, it's not luck. It's, well, we optimized the factory as much as we could. Now the constraint's the market.
mm,
So let's take this same thinking to deal with a market constraint that you can't work with the same way you can a factory. You don't have control over it the same way. So how do you do market constraints? And then, oh, we solved that. The third book is about projects. How does this thinking apply to projects where some things can happen in parallel and you're looking for the longest task and things like that? And over the course of 25 years, you see, so this is as big as it is. No, wait, it's bigger. It applies here and here. And then his final book was a conversation with his daughter, and ultimately comes down to, this is just how systems in the world work. It's
mm.
about everything. And I've had the same experience with Agile, where, yeah, this is extreme programming is about programming. It's a software thing. Yeah, like, well, maybe not just a software thing. And now, 20 plus years later, this is just humans collaborating on meaningful outcomes together.
Mm, really, yes, that's and but when I remember a few conversations I had with people around Goal, that all his books, and saying, well, but it's the same trick. Yes, but no, it's like it's the same trick, it's the same idea, but it's applied at different levels. And by reading the multiple books, you actually start to understand that it's a system. It is, yes, you can apply it at multiple levels, but somehow I needed to read at least two books before I realized that it was be able to apply it to multiple things, because I was only focusing on one part. And of course, he did it for 30 years, and okay, that helped them to understand it much more than most of us ever will. But it's interesting to do it. And yeah, it's I can definitely advise, read at least two of his books, to that you can see it at multiple levels. It's yeah, I really like the fact that you say it's not just one book; it's a series of books, because that's that what it easy is. And it's incredible that the more you learn it, the more you understand that it can apply to multiple things, and then you still don't apply it everywhere where you could, I would say, or at least I don't. It's and I liked also the fact that you want to link it back to agile, because indeed we there's a lot that we can learn on how to apply it at multiple levels. So thank you for sharing that. So I want to move to a question that is for me one of the most interesting questions. Is that what question do you think I didn't ask, and that should I also ask, because I was really already interested in a lot of your answers, and I know that you've thought long and hard about a lot of things in the agile world. So I'm really interested to know what kind of question you can come up with.
Ooh, that's,
Now I put a
that's
lot
a,
of pressure on you, but
yeah. Oh,
it might be a silly question as well, but maybe it was been way too serious so far. So
I don't know. This is a hard one. As someone who has my own podcast and asks other people questions, I should be really good at questions here. But I was prepared to be on the other end of this and not prepared to be asking questions. And you
well,
got
is there
me.
something that you've been pondering around, thinking about lately? Is there anything that you've been discussing about in your own podcast or in other things?
There's a topic I've been thinking about lately that I'm just starting to connect to work.
Mm,
I've gotten reinterested in the ideas around permaculture, which is
mm,
a kind of gardening and agriculture um, philosophy um, that involves thinking about your garden or your farm or whatever as a complete ecosystem, and your role as the the human involved with stewarding this system is setting up a healthy ecosystem that can
mm,
survive. And so you're thinking about uh, not having to add fertilizer, not having to add new seeds every year, but creating a system that can sustain itself. And a client and friend of ours reminded me about this recently when we were interviewing her on our show. She was talking about her interest in permaculture, and I got back to some of the literature around that, and it's got me thinking about the business equivalent of that.
mm,
That uh, the value of creating healthy systems that can sustain themselves, and in that case, like systems for product development, where we don't need to keep adding external inputs to it in the form of extra investment or new people or extra training, but how do we create something that is kind of what we talk about in the agile community, this continuous improvement, this sustainability. And so the metaphor of building that garden or farm, and then I've been watching videos of farms that do this well around the world, where they have well integrated plants and animals and humans, and all meeting each other's needs and growing healthier and healthier. And so I've been thinking about how that applies to work. So that's the thing that I don't have completely sorted out in my mind yet, but it's sort of food for thought that's been bouncing around in my head a lot lately.
So it might be really interesting if people have watching this who have ideas and put things into comments, because it's indeed, yeah, can we build a sustainable economy in one way or another? That's what you're talking about. And
Right.
when you create if it's at small scale inside a company, but at larger scale in the economics that don't always go for super scaling and trying to grow all the time, but really like, okay, how can we do it? Because even, let's face it, even in the agile community, that's not what we've been doing, because we have been adding clients and have been adding lots of things. So even there we were scaling as crazy, I think, the last 20 years. And of course we were still finding resources or people that wanted to learn or that we thought we could teach them. uh, but yeah, how could we apply some of that to our industry? That's really interesting. um, because yeah, I've also seen that for me sometimes the more healthier companies are not always the companies that get a lot of funding, but okay, how can we grow in a lean startup way that we can okay build our company just with the income of our clients, but how could we do that even a step further? That's really interesting to think about. So that's yeah, so thank you for that question, because yeah, I can understand that this is not something you have already an answer to, but at the same time, that's maybe why it's so much interesting to think about that as a whole. And let's hope that in a couple of years that we do have some answers to that. And so definitely want to hear back if we look back at that in a couple of years and have an answer for these things. Okay, I don't know if you want to, if you have already an idea of an answer that you wanted to add, but
No, I'm still very early in that. I'm sure other people have been thinking about this longer than I have. And so if other people have seen more clear connections, I would love to hear about it and love to connect with those people.
yeah. So let's see if we can bring that. Okay, let's move to that last question. Who do you think I should ask next? And some of the yeah, because I know that you have a list of a few people that you wanted to talk about. So let's hear it.
My co-founder in humanizing work, Peter Green, is
I
really
think that's
interesting.
him.
That's Peter. Yep. Musician turned agilist, was the leader of the agile transformation at Adobe for a
Adobe.
long time
Wow.
before he joined me. So he's got some really interesting experiences and would be great to talk with. And then a few of our clients came to mind that have interesting stories. And I'm always fascinated by people who have integrated agile ideas into their lives more broadly or in areas outside of the standard kind of software development. So Nicole Forsyth is the person who
Mm-hmm.
reminded me about permaculture. She was a
I
librarian
think
before.
that's Nicole. Is
Yep,
that correct?
that's
Yes.
Nicole.
There's a few
Yep.
Nicoles that, yeah, I wasn't sure about that, so I didn't check up front. But yeah, luckily it's the right picture.
Yep.
And so tell me a little more. Why do you want? Why did you pick Nicole? What do you? Because you said people who are integrating some of these things into other parts of their life. So could you tell me a little more about why is that Nicole is as part of these people?
When I met Nicole, she was a librarian at a community college and was interested in how agile ideas might apply there.
Wow, at a
And
library.
at a library, and wasn't sure exactly what it would be, but she came to one of my classes where we were just beginning to explore how these ideas might apply outside of software development, and completely ran with it and changed the direction of her career and has become a coach in several organizations and is having a significant impact there.
And do you
And
know how she learned about agile? Because if she was not totally not into the IT world, how did she discover agile? Do you have any, or well, maybe I can discover it. We're talking with her, but maybe
yeah, it would be interesting for you to hear her story, but the short version is that she was from a small city, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that had uh, a remarkably large and active agile community,
mm,
and the ideas were kind of in the community, getting beyond software development. One of the most remarkable clients I've ever worked with was an organization there, and so they were the ones that kind of sponsored this uh,
so they
local
basically
conversation about
dragged her into the conversation, something like that. Okay,
right,
that's
and
definitely
she ran with
an
it. Yeah.
that's really interesting to learn. Okay. And you still had, I think, one or two more people. I don't know.
Yeah, there were a couple more. Dallas Jackson was the.
I didn't find a picture of Dallas, so that's yeah. We'll have
Well,
to do it
I'll,
without a picture. But anyway,
yeah, I'll point you
still,
to her LinkedIn profile. I got to know her when she was the first Scrum Master at Whole Foods Market, and was involved with a lot of the agile transformation at Whole Foods before the Amazon acquisition changed things.
Mm.
And Dallas is another one who went on to have a larger impact than just her team, and really take some of the things that she learned from us and run with it. I think she has an interesting story about the human impact of this kind of transformation.
And it's interesting because, like you say, Whole Foods. That's really, yeah, it's a different kind of company, I would say. Yeah, it's so that's might be interesting. Yeah.
And certainly before the Amazon acquisition, Whole Foods had a culture and values that really resonated with Agile. And so it felt like just giving them more words and practices to live out what they already cared about. And Dallas was amazing about running with that and really embodying that in the organization.
And do you know if that culture survived the acquisition of
As far as I
Amazon?
know, it
That
didn't.
okay, that's sad.
Yeah, which is sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people scattered, and the work went back to, I think, some of what it looked like before.
Yeah,
So
which is
it's that
something we
scale
typically
thing again.
see when exactly when things are scaling and going into a large company.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much. That was it, or did you have?
Oh, and then there's one more, which is Vivian Rhodes has been a client of ours for several years. Who
And I think that's Vivian, right?
that is Vivian. Yeah,
And so tell me a little
and
bit more. What do you want to me to know about her?
Vivian is a leader at a vitamin and supplement company, uh, and she joined that company to start an innovation team because this particular company has been really successful at scale and recognized they had the innovator's dilemma problem where they
Mm.
were getting disrupted by startups and wanted to address that. She saw an article that mentioned agile for innovation and ended up at one of Peter's leadership classes, and then took those ideas and saw the potential completely outside of software development. And so her team went from initially the pace of innovation there was one or two things in a year, one or two new product ideas, to in their first year 27 validated
Wow,
product ideas. Yeah,
27. That's more than twice a month. That's incredible. So from
right.
did I remember correctly? One or twice a year to one of twice to more than two a month.
That's right.
That's 12 times more. Let's say even more than that. So that's incredible.
And figured out how to sustain that. And so she's
So
a remarkable leader, and I love the way that she's applied agile and lean startup ideas way outside of the software context that they came from.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I was interesting when you originally sent me this list. I was like, okay, if everybody gives me 4 or 5 people to talk to, my list is exploding completely.
This is the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know I already have a list of 300 people, and that's at one person a week. That's for 6 years. I don't think I'm going to continue for another 6 years. We don't know. We'll see in a couple of years. Um, but when I looked at the list, that was like, okay, this is really interesting. There's multiple kind of people in multiple kind of directions. And like you said in the beginning, this is not just into IT. This is people from multiple kind of companies in multiple industries, and that was what fascinates me about this list, because it's really, and that's for me part of why I'm doing this. There's always, of course, it's nice to talk to people who have started agile, who are doing agile for a very long time, because there's a lot of value, like this conversation. But for me, there's also a lot of value of the people from the future, for the future, that these are the ones who's going to change it even more than we do, and hopefully much longer after that we've done agile. So that's why it's really interesting to have such a, yeah, diverse list. Let's put it like that. So thank you very much for your time, because it's been a wonderful
My pleasure.
conversation, to have all that and to learn a lot about you, and different kind of things that you've been doing. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to talk to you? or to connect with you?
My website is humanizingwork.com, and you can connect with.
I
You can see
think
what
this is
I'm about
you,
there.
and
Yep,
then yeah,
that's my
exactly.
bio. My email is my first name at humanizingwork.com, and I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn as well, and would love to connect with people there.
I'll put LinkedIn. I didn't put Twitter anymore because, well, Twitter these days is a kind of strange place today. So I'm not sure how long it will survive. At
Yeah,
one part of me hopes it, and at the other part is like, what's going on there? It's talking about trying
it's
to scale
fascinating to
the.
watch.
Yeah, exactly. But in that sense, I'm trying not to link to it or no longer. But LinkedIn is probably a very good way to connect to people and some things. So thank you very much for your time, and it's been a wonderful time. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and
I did. Yeah, I appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you at a conference in the future.
well, this year, I think I said it in the beginning. I'm not sure anymore. This year, I try to not go to conferences, so or at least not leave Belgium. So I'm using a lot of my time, connecting with people from the conference, the community, using this podcast. But I'm sure just in a couple of years, probably even next year, I will do the same thing. Because, like you said earlier, or somewhere earlier, there's still a lot of value in connecting with people, and indeed being in a bar and discussing it still feels different than what we're doing. I'm trying to mimic and make it as look as close or feel as close to having that conversation, but like you said, it still is a little bit different if we're physically able to actually almost touch each other or touch each other. So okay, thank you very much. And well, like you say, hopefully we can meet sometime in person. Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.